Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. Together we explore the underlying connections and root causes of our life together so that we might discover what is really true and in the process develop an antiviral mindset in a culture of spiritual decay, moral disease, and political deception. I'm Mike.
And I'm Luke.
You're Luke. And today we're going to talk about some things having to do with spiritual reality. I don't think we're going to spend much time with news stuff because not much seemed that interesting to me. But maybe
Gavin Newsom came up a little bit.
Christian nationalism.
Yeah, we'll see.
Some other things. Yes, he did. He came up because Dianne Feinstein passed away. So there's
he's also just trying to make a name for himself, showing up at the Republican debate.
Yes, that's true.
The spin room. So apparently the press all get together in a room afterward, and they just representatives from all the candidates go in there and talk them up.
Yeah,
and in goes Gavin Newsom.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And you saw they did secure he's going to debate DeSantis, hosted by Fox.
Yeah.
Which is interesting since the post-second debate polls, DeSantis dropped 10 to Trump. Mm. So now there are some Republicans, Newt Gingrich among them, who are arguing, let's not have another debate. This is over. We have the nominee.
It's Trump.
Yeah.
DeSantis challenged Trump to a debate too.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
No, I did not.
Because it's Hannity's hosting the one with Newsom.
Okay.
So after the debate, DeSantis is sitting with Hannity, and he says
DeSantis has got
and he says Trump
ought
to be here. Trump owes it to the American people to make his case.
I mean, that's of course what he should say.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I think you might agree with that, but I'm not sure that I do on a political basis only.
I mean, I agree with it because I want DeSantis to win.
Yes.
And I think
but also,
you don't know if DeSantis can really do it until he faces Trump.
That's true. That's a good point. I was thinking it just from a statesmanship perspective. It's more statesman-like to debate.
Yeah.
However, from a raw, back alley political fight, he doesn't need to.
Yeah,
He's
practically.
won.
And that is because no matter how much primarying there is, he's still at least like a halfway incumbent.
That's exactly right.
And so the incumbent does get
unusual.
it, and there's a huge advantage he just has.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So the question to open up with then is, does Newsom need Obama? And let me frame the question just so you know where I'm going with it. Why it's a question is because I've seen more articles recently. Just recently, quite a few articles trying to say that Michelle Obama is going to be dropped into the
that she'll be the last minute throw in.
And in fact, I saw August of next year as a speculative time, which is absurd.
Okay, so this could go with the conspiracy theory that Joe Biden is actually already dead, and that there are doubles replacing him. So you'll see these videos.
See Fetterman
you'll see
claim.
Yep, it's the same people. So you'll see videos. He's an 80-something-year-old man, and his skin is loose and thin.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, "Look, his skin is wrinkled in a funny way, and his ears sticking out."
Yeah.
And it's a mask.
Yeah.
And the CIA, of course, has these incredible masks. And so the idea is he's already dead. Now they're just waiting to say he's dead when it's the opportune time. And I think if that's a double, why would they put it in the dumbest, most doddering version?
That's interesting. I was thinking about a distortion of that same thing. I thought to myself the other day, if he died, how long can they go? How long can Bernie's that weekend kind of thing?
Yeah.
How
weekend
long
at Bernie's.
could they go? I mean, realistically.
Yeah.
If they didn't want to say it right away, could they go 2 weeks?
Because he just doesn't make appearances.
That's right. Could he?
Sure.
I think he could go an incredible amount of time compared to a normal
scenario. I think they
scenario.
definitely would go long enough to get a plan in place.
I totally agree.
They probably already have it.
They've
probably had it in place since day one, to be honest.
Goodness, yeah.
But what happens with these plans is, as people come in and out of favor of positions of power, or with the people in power, the plans change. Who's the replacement?
Yeah. So the question is because Biden is clearly continuing at a deceleration. In fact, it's like what is it when you exponentially? It's not just the same in decline, but it's increasing.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to have to do something. There's nobody on the horizon. They've dumped RFK. He's dumped them.
Yeah.
They don't want him. Sanders not going to run again. Doesn't look like Hillary will be running again. So the speculation that I've made is that it will be Newsom, which is possible. Lots of people are saying
I think
Michelle.
Newsom could beat Trump.
Well, but hand in hand, my prediction is a dead person will beat Trump. They won't. It doesn't matter. No Republican is going to win this one. They will not win until state by state they are able to overturn the fraudulent behavior.
Right.
But in any case, The question is, though, if it is Newsom, you and I differed as to Michelle, whether she wants to do something like this or not. But we both agree that Newsom is a political animal.
Without a doubt.
Would like this. Does he, but that works against Obama getting a 4th term. So is Obama opposing it? And so the question is, does he need Obama? Can he work his way into this through Joe Biden?
So you're assuming a division between Joe Biden and Obama.
I am.
Yeah, and I think there is some. I think that division is Jill.
I definitely agree
because she's
that.
definitely handling him on some level.
Yeah.
And has, when he goes out and says, yeah, we're going to run again without permission.
Yeah.
Then immediately that week he gets a lot of stories about mistakes and indictments and things.
And I don't think I've seen anybody say Obama is running everything, but that he's the majority leader in a sense.
And Obama doesn't want to run everything.
No. And I agree with that. And to me, yeah, I agree with that. So the question is, can Newsom make a move around Obama? Because if he can't, then Obama, it's his pick, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, so I could see Newsom trying to curry favor with Obama, especially behind the scenes, which this is all speculation because how would we know?
Yeah.
But I
can't see that.
I think Michelle, if Michelle's saying I don't want it, which I mean she's vacationing, she's without Barry.
Yes.
Yeah. But if she said she'd want it, they would give it to her.
I agree.
And so in the meantime, everybody's going to the kingmaker and saying, or the king, and saying, "I'll be your puppet." And I think that's what
Newsom would do that.
I think he would.
He doesn't strike me as that, unless it's a way to get in and oust Obama from the inside.
Well, there's always that. Backstabbing is part of the game.
Yes, totally.
Right? Yeah.
That's interesting. I've ruled that out because I've thought Newsom doesn't want to be beholden to him.
I think I think Trump is the only president since Reagan, maybe, who isn't beholden to the machine. And that's why the machine turned on him so much. I think everybody else is only there with permission.
In some form or another.
Yeah. With an understanding they'll be obedient.
Well, if you're enjoying where we've started right now, which has just been a few political reflections, we're going to get into some more significant topics, then we'd ask you to go ahead and share it with a friend and click the like and subscribe button and leave us a good review.
There you go.
All right. Next question. Let's talk about spiritual reality.
Okay.
I asked this question, and we'll start it with this question, but I think we might go a few places with this. I was listening to that podcast. Which one is it?
Haunted Cosmos.
Which I have really enjoyed. Haunted Cosmos. And so it got me thinking about the spiritual reality. And you remember, did you ever read Flatline or Flatliners or Flat Dimension? The book on dimensionality? It's
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, so it there's a dimension of a two-plane dimension.
A two-dimensional plane.
Two-dimensional plane. Existence at that level. And if you did live at that level and a cube came through and passed through your dimension, a cube which exists in another dimension of which you're unaware.
Yeah.
When it passed through your dimension, you'd never know it was a cube.
Because you just can't see.
You can't see it.
Right.
All you see is the linear space line getting bigger and then smaller. That's all you would see. And so you'd speculate about the reality of this phenomena, right? But you wouldn't know what was true. You don't have eyes for the other dimension.
Right.
Now, if we posit, and as Christians, we actually are required, in a sense, to believe that there's a spiritual dimension to life, to this entire cosmos, such that Jesus can make anthropomorphic statements like, if his people don't praise him, even the rocks and mountains at some base fundamental level will even give praise against their inorganic nature, right?
Yeah.
There's this other dimension of life. It throbs. The curse is over the world, and the whole world longs and yearns.
Yeah.
The creation yearns, trees and stars.
Yeah, I was going to say the leaves
galaxies.
of the trees are clapping their hands.
That's exactly. You have this idea that there's a life beyond the one that we can see in the 3 dimension of physicality.
Right.
So here's the question then. I got to thinking about this. If we had eyes to see, which we don't, what would we see? Because we do have hints about what that life is.
Okay, wait. Hold on a sec. Because you're saying sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
If we have eyes to see, my assumption is that Adam and Eve in their pristine condition did have eyes to see.
I agree.
So maybe there is some latent ability that gets called psychic. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I believe this, actually.
Okay,
I believe in fallen humanity that this still exists and it pops up.
Right.
It's like trying to hold in something and it pops out instead. And you put a finger there and it pops up somewhere else, and we can't contain it. Furthermore, I also believe, which we're probably going to be on the same page with this, is that we are forbidden by Scripture to go to some of these ways of accessing that lost knowledge.
Witches and necromancers and mediums and spiritists.
And so the Bible represents some of these things as having a reality. It's a poor choice by Christians to join with the world and say only what we see is what's real and act as if those things don't exist. That's
so in other words, we're not forbidden from going to those occult purveyors of power and wisdom. We're not forbidden because they're fake.
Yes, because
we're forbidden because they're real, but they are inviting us into a dark kingdom that draws us and leads us astray.
They're using our lost capacities under the fall to deceive us if we'll engage with them.
Yeah.
And God says, don't do that anymore.
Right.
You need to be patient, wait for me. In addition, I will give you some access.
Right.
These would be spiritual gifts, eyes being open, the eyes of a heart. Here's what we believe as Christians, that our heart doesn't mean literal, but it means some extension past our physicality, in some sense central to us that we can see.
So is that heart, or is that like your spirit, your bowels?
I think heart, mind, spirit, they're like bishop, in my opinion, they're like bishop, elder, and overseer. They're the same thing, but they are more overlapping. They do have some unique things to provide, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Except, we don't have to have the debate today about tripartite and bipartite. It's the difference between spirit and soul.
Right.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I often have wondered, I've wanted to do some kind of study in Scripture on the psychology of Scripture. But the problem is I'd be importing today's understanding from literature written 2,000 years ago, because it uses mind, it uses heart, it uses spirit, it uses soul.
Right.
Suke, soul, is used in a very wide range.
Yep.
And so it would be, I think I would probably being too analytical and too scientific methody for what Scripture intended to be in the first place. I'd probably distort it.
So we have this fallen, or this latent, perhaps, capacity to see a spirit realm that does exist, but outside of our dimensionality, using that metaphor of two dimensions, right?
Using that metaphor, yeah.
The Bible doesn't say dimensional.
It doesn't.
Because obviously we're using a mathematical metaphor. Yeah.
Metaphor.
But how does that connect to the spiritual appearance of things? You were talking about that.
So I got to thinking then, what would things appear if we could see them in their with their spiritual components, or at least in a fuzzy, hazy way?
Okay, so you're saying, like, if the rocks cry out, when you look at a rock, you would realize somehow that it has that capacity.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I got to thinking, okay, what would my cat look like? And then I got to thinking, what would my dog, not dog, but what would a gun? And here's what jarred these thoughts, is something in the...
a gun.
A gun.
Okay.
And here's why I do the gun, because the podcast folks, Something Cosmos, Haunted Cosmos,
Yep.
they are going to do an episode, which they hinted at, having to do with AI as a place inhabited by the same ancient spirits that the Bible calls gods, fallen beings, that the fallen spirits that were given governing powers and still exercise some measure of them are now doing it for destructive ends. And yet they're real, what they do, and yet because they are now anti-God, they have different strategies through different centuries or millennia or what. So like right now, the strategy is to pretend there is no such thing as spiritual. It's just physical.
Right.
That was not what it was 2,000 years ago at all.
So if someone in the Bible was to see a flying saucer or a being appear in their room, they would say this is an evil spirit, an unclean spirit. Today, they're going to say it's an alien.
That's correct.
Right? They've got a materialistic explanation.
That's right.
And it's technology based rather than spiritual powers.
Completely, that's the one we live in today. So,
so are you rejecting the technology explanation? Because here's why I ask: the multidimensionality idea that is very materialistic. that there is, that we have a 3-dimensional physical plane in which we reside, but that there are perhaps higher dimensions in which could be interacting with us. Like, I like that explanation, but part of why I like it is it's describing physical laws that we can't observe but can theorize that they exist.
Well, so
it's almost like making miracles explainable.
I know, and here's what I don't like about that, and why I use it as an analogy only.
Okay.
Because what we're doing when we use the 2 to 3, and we say, okay, we can grasp that in our heads.
Yeah.
We then say it's the same 3 to 4.
Correct. Yeah.
And that may not be true at all.
Right.
That's assumed because in 2 to 3 dimensions, we're including only the physicality aspect.
Right.
A physical 3-dimension cube coming through a physical 2-dimension world.
But
when we get to 4, it's not physical, and we just have no capacity to grasp that.
Well, and it still also doesn't deal with the soul, with the question of spiritual.
Yes, I agree.
Like, why do I have this feeling in my heart?
That's right. Yeah.
Why do you?
We don't even understand that for us as people.
Yeah.
It's so outside of our capacities. So anyway, when I got to, so they posited that AI as a strategy. They did not say AI was evil spirits. Okay.
Although there's some evidence of that.
Okay.
I don't know if you've looked into that at all.
No, not too much.
Okay.
But they were just pausing and trying to snip around the discussion you could have headed into right there.
Yeah.
By saying that at one level, while what you said could be explored, at another level, this is a communication with fiber optics. It's light waves. It's
material existence.
It's material.
Yeah.
And so that what the spiritual beings are doing is using this as another strategy to present themselves, much like the alien strategy, right? They're not aliens in like little heads and whatnot necessarily.
Okay. So this is like a Ouija board. It's a tangible thing. It's a board. It's a little piece of wood, or I don't know what.
Sure.
And yet it can be imbued with some sort of spiritual communication.
It gets kind of drawn into
if you use it that way. If you invite it to be that way. Yeah.
The board itself, the wood, let's say it's made of ash and it had awls used to do the
cardboard.
I mean, it's just an
plastic.
inanimate object in one sense. And in that sense, we could say it's the user, not the weapon, which is
you're sounding like Jeremiah, I think it is now, who says, okay, with one piece of wood, you carve it into a god that you worship, and with the other one, you cook your food.
That's right.
Which one was powerful, right?
So he was trying to assault something going on there. Well, we run across this argument with guns all the time as conservatives because liberals say guns are evil. And we answer back and say guns are not evil. It's the person firing the gun.
But they have such potential for evil.
But here's the question. What would they look like in the spiritual world? Because are they something, in one sense you could argue, and you could make a leftist very happy with this argument, that the inherent nature of a gun is death, violence, and destruction.
That's right.
There may be a few other uses for it that could be enjoyment oriented, but the most use is death, violence, destruction.
Well, even the enjoyment
is dark.
Is that you're enjoying, like if you go out shooting, my family loves to go out shooting. You're enjoying the fact that you can create destruction over there.
That's exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like, wow, way over there I can break something.
Power. You hold something that has power, and right away when we get to that, we get into the fallen nature of man. The Bible's one of the gospel things I think values is that Christianity turns upside down. When I'm weak, I am strong.
Yeah.
And a gun is when I'm strong, I'm strong.
But
right?
but with the same gun, I'm thinking of war now, right?
Yes.
In the same war, you can do terrible things, but there can be incredible heroes.
I know.
And that I feel like that potential is intertwined in the sense not only of course guns and war, but in the sense that potential energy, and I'm getting a little material again, right? I'm using metaphor, but that anything that has great potential for good also therefore has great potential for evil. Like they're intertwined no matter what you do.
Let's use a biblical illustration. Jesus comes back, it says in Revelation, with a sword.
Yeah.
The sword could be like a gun. It is a thing of power and violence, death and destruction. Very little, unless some people, the old Crocodile Dundee, now that was a knife,
That's a knife.
And but
I got to rewatch that.
Yeah.
I wonder if it holds up or if it's just painfully.
So I was thinking, what would a gun look like? What would a cat look like? I mean, people, I start with small ideas because they're so big already. And to get to big things like people is, I just don't even, C.S. Lewis's famous quote is, "You've never met a mere mortal."
Oh, yeah, right.
We are all fantastically, he says, if you met an unfallen, created human person, you would fall down to worship.
Like they do in the Bible when
Like
they
they do
encounter an
in the
angel.
angels, that's right.
Yeah. There's a glory that we
There's a
haven't
glory
seen, that we can't imagine.
We just know nothing about.
But I will say, you hear snippets of it, and some of my experiences in the presence of God, I would say you do see a glimpse.
Okay, and
it changes
Peter
you.
says we've tasted glory.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think what happens in those things, and this is why the physical metaphor completely falls apart, but it's the only one we have to work with, is the spiritual dynamic or dimension of things is something we do taste and experience as Christians. But it's hard to think of it as a way of existence. We're so deceived and so entrapped in a physical experience of things.
So I'm immediately stirred with the idea that how many people, hundreds, dozens, thousands, saw Jesus tangibly, walked with him, lived with him, and never saw it.
That's right.
And walked away and said, I just can't follow this guy. He's talking about cannibalism.
And there's that interesting parable with the man has been cast down, and he begs for a drink of water, and he says, "Send me back to my brothers."
Oh, Lazarus and the rich man.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's in hell.
And that's right.
The rich man.
And the answer that Jesus says is stunning. If they have not listened to Moses,
they won't listen.
Even though one rises from the dead, they won't listen.
How prophetic was that, right?
Yes, it was prophetic, but I think what it says is there's no this world answer to open the eyes spiritually.
Okay. So let's extend that a little bit, right? Because raising of the dead would be the most profound miracle, I think.
Probably.
Because death is the great enemy,
I think
right?
so, yes.
Okay, so I'm thinking now of the Mount of Transfiguration. Why does only Peter, James, and John get to see that? If it's not something similar to what Jesus was saying there, that, he could walk around like that all day long. Everyone would bow down, but they wouldn't see it right. Their heart would still doubt.
That is a good point. That's true. We know one other example like that where they hear a voice from heaven and some have said it thundered.
Yeah, they just talk themselves out of it immediately.
That's right. This is my beloved son. Yes, so it's difficult for us. So I was thinking about that with a gun. I was thinking, can you envision dark tendrils of smoke? Little flashes
Stranger
of
Things,
light.
when you see an object in the upside down, it looks different.
You got to admit, I don't know if you like Stranger Things or not. I've not watched the latest season because I was very frustrated where they went.
Yeah, I opted out. Well,
Me
same
too.
way. Yep.
But the first two, and especially the first one, I thought it was exceptional. And the creature, I just thought it was very good to paint that dynamic of spiritual reality as real.
Yes, that's right. I agree.
And strange. The only way we can almost connect is through physicality, which is interesting given Ezekiel, right? When they have these chariots with wheels.
The wheel within the wheel.
And wheels within wheels, and eyes on the rims of the wheels. And then another vision has them with multiple animal faces. And when they faced east, they were this animal, and west, they were that animal. I think what's being done there is giving physicality. It's like a crayon drawing from the spiritual world, but for us,
that's right.
It's
it
Leonardo
sounds
da Vinci.
Crazy.
It's the highest. It exceeds.
Oh, you're saying
from
to them as crayons, to us looks like.
Us,
see, what I was thinking is, you see this, and then you come back and you say, "Okay, I got to draw this," and all you have is crayons. Oh. How do I communicate this glorious thing that I saw? That's when it says, "I saw him. I saw what was like a son of man."
Yes, I agree.
It's like it's not. He wasn't saying it was a human. He's saying there was something about him that was human-like, and yet so much more.
Edwards has a whole sermon on the verse in Revelation that says, "The roads of the New Jerusalem are like as gold unto glass." And he says, the thing is, there's no gold that's glass, and there's no glass that's gold. So when he says it's like this and like that, it's the nearest thing he can do to communicate in the vision what he's
something
seeing
glorious,
as to point at glory. So then I got to think about what would happen to us if we thought about things that everything around us has a spiritual dimension to it.
Okay.
If we could but see it.
Right.
And here's what it would do, I think, a couple things. Number one, my cat that I can get irritated with, it probably has almost solely glorious reflection. It's done nothing wrong.
Okay,
It's
wait.
under the curse of this world.
Is a house cat more glorious than a bobcat out in the wild?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, I'm just curious. What is it about the cat that you think particularly has glory? Okay.
It could
So
have been
an
a dog.
animal.
An animal, yeah. But I mean, they would be different. A house cat would be different. Anything domesticated has taken on some incarnational component of humanity.
It's been civilized.
It's tasted us.
Okay.
Just like we
and
taste
so in that way,
partake
has
in
it
the
been
divine.
improved in a spiritual?
I actually personally think so.
I mean, I do
There's some
too, because
way.
when we are improved, when we obey the Holy Spirit,
That's right.
we shed the animal nature.
We begin to reflect God's life a little more.
Okay,
And we
okay.
take it in and we're changed by it.
Yeah.
And I think our pets in the best ways are changed by their being brought into our spheres.
Right.
But that doesn't mean there isn't a glory in the wild, right? It has its own kind
It
of
has
glory.
a different. That's
Yeah,
right.
there's a fierceness and wildness.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite shows to watch, we used to watch when my kids got up super early for going to school and I was still driving them, was Big Cat.
I've never
Big
heard of
Cat
it.
Diaries or Big Cat. One of the Nat Geo things.
Yeah, yeah.
But it just tracks these leopards and lions, and the life of these cats is incredible, I think.
So that actually reminds me of the gun too. It makes me think
Yes,
there's
that's
something
right.
in those cats that has power.
That's right. So I think
Yeah.
the gun would have these dark tendrils somehow to reflect a darkness about them, the
Right.
violence, and it would have these rays of glory because God made things to be powerful.
Right.
It's us who have a wrong relationship to power in our fallen nature. We only think it as a way for me to be better than you.
That's how we corrupt
That's
it.
how we corrupt it.
So I am trying to envision this, right? I like to doodle and draw, like something glorious that's been stained. Right? It's
Yeah.
our corruption that stains
That's right.
nature.
That's right.
So there's a couple things
Yes, that's right.
there's a couple things in the Bible that key in on this that I think you're right on. One is that I believe it's Paul who expresses how nature groans
Yeah.
in desiring that we would be made glorified, that the sin and corruption would be
That the revealing
shed,
of the sons of God.
and finally what would come
wait for this
forth.
day.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the corruption we see in nature is nature suffers under the weight of the
That's
corruption.
right. Nature's
right?
done no wrong. It's suffering.
The other one is
right.
Elisha speaking to his servant saying, you just can't see. Your eyes
Yes,
aren't open.
that's right.
Right. And then when he prays that his eyes would be open, he sees the armies of God, which to think, was Elisha just having this ability? Was he walking around seeing what you're
That
describing?
is a great question.
And
What do you
how
think?
it's possible, right?
It is possible.
Yeah.
I gear towards the other one. I gear towards him living by faith and saying we are surrounded by God's armies at all times. And there's this moment, and so he prays that for his servant, his that God would open his eyes. And I don't think he knew what would happen. It could have been a prayer that was just of faith, help him to see by faith.
Okay.
But instead, he opens up and he sees what? Chariots of flaming with fire, right?
Yeah,
Around
yeah,
the whole, have you guys been to Israel?
No.
I want to do a trip. We should
go.
figure out a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to do a trip. We'll figure out a way to get
You know
guys
what we should
there.
do?
But that valley is
We should
incredible.
host an on second thought trip to Israel.
Oh my goodness. That's not a bad
where both
idea.
of our listeners come with us.
Both of our listeners. We actually could probably get a whole group of listeners.
It would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in any case, that valley that he said, lift up your eyes, is an incredible valley.
Oh.
And it's massive and it's around you. And to see that. But even that is, I think, a compromise because I'm not sure. I am sure, but I have no alternative. I don't think the armies of God are chariots and fire. I think
Okay.
that's just a way to tell us that was appropriate to that day.
Wait, so I went and saw Hamlet
Okay.
down at the Oregon Shakespeare
Yeah.
in Ashland. This has been more than a decade ago. And Hamlet, one of the characters is the ghost of his dead father, who was a soldier. And so they dress him in modern soldier attire, right? With body armor and helmet, and,
yeah.
Kevlar and
Yeah.
camouflage. And it made it far more moving to
Because you
put
can
it into
relate
my
to it.
context.
That's right.
And the whole play was a modern rendition. These really rich and wealthy and backstabbing family, right?
Yeah, it made you feel military.
it made me feel like this is more real versus this historic kind of campy, like, oh, they're wearing togas and whatnot.
Sometime in the future, we'll have to have a part of a conversation that we have on what is accommodation in Scripture. Because I think it's one of the beautiful topics of understanding Scripture, that God has communicated to us in a way we can understand.
So, yeah. But I'm just thinking, okay, so if today you were to see God's army, perhaps you'd see drone strikes and tanks and more technology.
Yeah, that's exactly something like that.
Well, so
which is weird, but
was it? So here's the thing, though. The other side of that is that Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind.
Yeah.
And then blocking his way from Elisha running to go with him was a chariot of fire, right?
Yeah.
So was there an eye-opening experience Elisha had then?
I know.
That then these years later, with his own servant, he can open his eyes.
That's a good point. That is a great, actually, that's, you know what, that's probably pretty good to say it that way, that he may have had an idea that he was running with when he thought of the armies of the Lord are with us.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, maybe we should alter one statement. When we say that it's not real, it's crayon, maybe it's real plus a whole lot more that we can't understand. So for example,
it's like colors your eyes can't see.
That's right.
Yeah.
And chariots, there's nothing wrong in a culture where chariots is a primary element of power. Mm-hmm. It means power.
Right.
And so to be seen as chariot doesn't mean it's not true. It's that and a whole lot more that the audience wouldn't have understood at that point. But the point would be it's power.
Well, and I think our desire to take the Bible literally leads us sometimes to too much literal. Like, literal is the wrong word, right? Because it's a literary use, so it is appropriate. But to look at these visions of like the dry bones. I remember I was well into my 20s before I realized that dry bones didn't actually happen, right? That instead God's showing him these bones, that it's going to become an army, and then he comes out of a vision, not to see it now an army before him, but rather to say, wow, God wants to do something powerful among these dead hearts.
Yeah.
The people that I see day to day, God's going to bring them to life. And so because I was trained, right, as a young conservative evangelical, you read everything's literal. Everything's literal. Yeah.
The literal hermeneutical. So one of the things that this touches on that I've never been able to really gain any ground on is the whole Prince of Persia withstood me.
Okay. So we're talking Daniel 9?
Wherever it is.
Yeah. And so he prays. Can I just give the little quick?
Yeah.
So Daniel prays and then is fasting for 21 days, at the end of which an angel appears and says that the answer to your prayer was given immediately.
That's right.
But the Prince of Persia resisted us, and then was it Gabriel? Michael came to help.
Yes.
And now I've gotten to you.
That's right. Now, how would you draw it?
How would I? Yeah.
How did they resist? When we resist, if we want to use force, if our hands were, our knuckles were, we have, we're physical.
Yeah.
What about when you're immaterial? How do you resist?
Right.
There must be its own set of laws that exist there. And we just don't know what they are.
And the Bible is very much not telling us.
It's not telling us. That's
which
correct.
To me means it's fun to think about.
Yeah.
Right? But if I were to take, and this is sort of like the study of angels, if I were to take too much time in it, I'm not trusting God that he's giving me what I need.
Yeah. I think the few hints are what they are telling us is it's worth a little bit of your thought in order that you might function with this idea that there is a whole world that you don't see.
That it's real.
That it's real.
Absolutely, yes.
That's the point of it.
That's right.
That's the point of the few pictures that are there.
And I think the same is true with the chariots, right?
Yeah, that's what
and
I
an
think
army.
too.
It's like, okay, what does this army look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of we were talking about chemistry in school this week, and it reminds me of the idea of like electrons around an atom. And we have these little bit of ways of measuring what they are and what they weigh.
Yeah.
But is it a particle? Is it a cloud?
Yeah.
And how does the cloud behave? It's all mystery, right?
Yeah, that's
and we can peek into it, and we can use the knowledge, but there's a limit to what we can see.
I did just read an interesting book on dark matter. It won't make my recommendations here, but it was interesting, dark matter, that this is a novel, and so they were expressing it as everything that we know is there but can't see.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, that's so interesting as a Christian to think about, because we believe that in Colossians it says he holds all things together by the word of his power.
Right.
So,
well, there is something spiritual about that too, because dark matter is there's an error in science called the Deus ex machina, which means I've reached the limit of my explanation, and so I just say it's God. God in the machine is literally what that means. Well, dark matter is that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's we don't know. We're just going to call it this.
That's right.
It's like the ether.
That's right. All right. Hey, we're there's different ways to support us. Tell us quickly the Trinity School. We reflect a little bit of that, but what do you do, and how is this part of that?
The Trinity School is expanding its mission, is what I would say. I've been thinking about this a lot because we don't have a ton of students, but I also feel like my call in life is more than just to teach class, right? There's an influence, there's an expansion of skills and exploring that I feel called to do. So part of what we're trying to do, what I'm working on, is making the Trinity School into like a collaborative. So people who want to expand business, that they can find collaborators there, right? People who want to gain an influence in bringing righteousness to the public conversation, that there's a part of what the Trinity School does that supports that. So the idea is about reimagining and reinventing education, industry, the arts, and influence.
Would you say, in some sense, one of the goals, there could be a few, you've named a couple there, one of them is to get people to think again, kids?
Absolutely.
To think a second time about what they're seeing and what's being told to them.
Yeah, there's a story about how American public schools were formed under the influence, I think, of John D. Rockefeller, but I could be wrong. Some rich old guy. Yeah, and one of the things he says is, I don't want thinkers, I want workers.
Yeah,
and the American education
system, the assembly line
system
requires that.
Is
the Ford company
get the right answers. That's right. And so we definitely are working to resist that. But I feel like it's not just for kids, right? And that's what this is. This isn't really for kids.
Exactly.
Although I have a lot of teenagers tell me they're interested in what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I will say, if you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School, we're building, really what I call it is building culture, right? We're communities that honor Christ. Then check out what we're doing. It's at gracestaten.com/Trinity School. You can donate. You could subscribe to this podcast. And there's also some other resources there that you might find.
Have you seen the commercial on BMW and 7? Culture is built by 7.
No.
Yeah, this commercial, I thought you'd like it. 7 days in the week, 7 wonders of the world, which is subjective, but 7 planets, 7 this, 7 that, and BMW's new i7. There's a free promo.
Are they saying that they are God?
One recommendation. I'm gonna recommend another biography. I'm actually gonna recommend 2 real quick. Lincoln, a biography on Lincoln, called "Team of Rivals." Have you heard of it or read it?
I've heard this phrase and I've heard it talked about for sure.
It's exceptional. Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln, by Doris Kerning Goodwin. The nutshell version is that he put on his staff his adversaries for the presidency,
right?
Because he wanted to benefit from their banging their ideas against one another.
And this was part of the founders' design. Originally, if you got second place to the presidency, you became the vice president.
And it was such a volatile time that there was some need, almost like JFK asking LBJ to be his running mate, which whom he hated, and LBJ hated Kennedy.
And maybe helped him get assassinated. We don't know.
Yes.
Maybe.
Anyway. So in any case, a team of rivals, exceptional. And really you come away with, as a Christian even, Lincoln as the leader, but collaborative, peaceful, and extraordinarily gracious for people that plotted behind his back that he found out about, stabbed him in the back, and how he dealt with them with long suffering is incredible biography.
So I've been interested in Lincoln lately because I grew up, him being lionized in my education and books I've read. And, I've been following some Christians lately who are more of a Southern persuasion, who don't necessarily think of Lincoln as a hero.
Sure.
And there's some bias there. And so I need to talk to more people from the South. I mean, I grew up living in there a little bit, but I was quite young. Mm-hmm. But how they think of the Civil War, I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I don't assume as much in listening to their talk of Lincoln is that he was the reason that the North won. In other words, he's lionized in part because he won this really terrible and difficult civil war.
Yeah.
And so we look to his leadership patterns, his leadership habits, and say, well, they must have been good because look at the results.
Right.
But generally, that's not a great way to do it, right?
Yeah.
I heard someone predicting that, talking about 2016 election, they said it was 98% chance that Hillary was going to win.
Yeah.
And then she didn't. And so everybody said, well, they must have been wrong. But that doesn't mean they were wrong. They might have been exactly right. There was a 98% chance, but that doesn't still not guaranteed,
2%, does it?
But we think of victory meaning 100% just because it happened.
That's right.
So, like when I read what Lincoln did as a leader, and then I look at what I did as in my experience as a leader, I don't do what he did. I would not invite hostile and toxic people into a leadership, like an elder board of a church. I was thinking I wouldn't. I would kick them out.
Yeah.
And yet he did. And so was that, hidden genius, or was it a weakness that he wasn't able to really stand up for himself like maybe he should have? Okay.
It's a long one though. It's a big book.
Yeah.
But it was tough to put down.
You're convinced though.
Convinced what?
About the leadership question. Do you think Team of Rivals is a right way to lead?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
No. However, I think it was necessary, and he turned it into a positive rather than a destruction.
So it's what he had to do.
I think he had to do it
because he didn't have enough power, enough
That's
clout.
right. And there was basically the Civil War was breaking out, in the process of breaking out.
Yeah.
And what he needed to do is he put his rivals, he needed to appease them, and he gave them missions and jobs of substance so that they would not conspire or at least minimize it. And that was largely successful, even though it was unsuccessful in different places.
Yeah, there's an interesting book called The 48 Laws of Power. It's a recent book, and it's basically like an updated modern Machiavelli Prince.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And what he's talking about is and the author writes the book, and I don't necessarily recommend the book. It's an amoral look at how to
which is the
use
Prince's
power
that way too. Yeah,
right. So he's describing if you seek power, deception is the rule.
Yeah.
And therefore, here are a list of ways to deceive.
How to have a revolution.
Yeah. But one of the things he talks about is all these backhanded ways to get the person who's against you to keep them close so that then you can stab them in the back later so that you can maintain your position.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about insurgent and integrated leadership. You have a comment there before we get into a couple Christian nationalism things.
Okay, well, so you know about Thomas Sowell. You know who that is?
I do.
Yeah, so he's an African-American economist and commentator about, he's very...
incredibly insightful thinker.
And he's in his 90s now, and I actually still follow him on Twitter.
Books.
Because I think that he's got an assistant or somebody posting quotes, and things like that. But they're fascinating. So I was going through YouTube this afternoon, and I saw a clip of like 6 black guys in a room in their 20s reacting to Thomas Sowell, right? And they called him Thomas Sowell, like they didn't even know who he was really. And so Thomas Sowell, it was from his book about the claim that what we think of as inner city black culture is actually redneck culture, and that it came from England, right? The figures of speech, the mentalities. It's actually poor whites in England who came to the U.S. to find opportunity. Well, when the black people got free, they think, or we think now, that their way of speaking, their social priorities of inner city black people is like African. And what Thomas Sowell was saying is it's not African at all. Even their African culture got stripped away, and they adopted the poor white culture, their own version of it.
Urbanized.
Of these immigrants from England who had become what we call Southern rednecks.
Yeah.
Right? And there's actually this region of Wales, I think, that their dialect is super similar to Southern rednecks. And so he was talking about what's the story that inner city black people, and this was their conversation, this group of men, right? That they believed. And he was describing how in the beginning, an insurgency, leaders in an insurgency, so like Martin Luther King, compared to leaders in a victorious, like once you've won, the leadership has to change. But what happened was the peers of Martin Luther King, so Jesse Jackson and some of these others,
Sharpton.
They had to maintain their position of power, and their power was based on
insurgent.
Well, it was based on the community, the black community, feeling put upon and oppressed.
Right.
And so they have this strong incentive as leaders if suddenly the black community, or not suddenly, if the black community were to be free and be prosperous,
Then
you
what?
wouldn't need them
That's
anymore.
right. That's right.
And so there's this perverse incentive going on within
correct.
that story.
Yeah.
And so what I started thinking about is in
And
Christianity,
that's what you're calling integrated leadership versus insurgent.
right? So Martin Luther King and his peers, they were an insurgent leadership group,
Right.
They were trying to undermine and change the
Never
social
gotten
order.
past that, really.
And then what happened was that they could have integrated in a way that would have been rich for both parties. It would have deepened the experience of America by saying, look, we have this and we have that,
Which
but now
is
we're
Thomas
one.
Sowell,
Which is
Walter Williams.
That's right.
There are black conservatives who have lived that way, but there's not a lot.
Well, and not only that, the black community statistically was living that way
Yes, that's correct.
under Martin Luther King and
Yes.
has degraded over
Yes.
the decades since.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, okay, in Christianity, it's sort of in reverse. We're going from an integrated, pivotal part of Christian culture, or of American culture, Christians having a strong influence. Every president openly saying, I'm a Christian, I'm a Bible man, all that.
Yeah.
And now we're becoming an insurgency. So the leaders that we've looked upon in Christianity is, right?
By force.
By force or fault of our own, right? I think there's a little bit of both.
That's right. I agree.
And so the leaders we looked to even 10 years ago, right? You might have looked at a megachurch pastor and
I see
said,
where you're going with
this guy is doing what I want to do, but better. And that's why his church is so big.
Yeah.
And so if I can just learn from the megachurch pastors,
So
whereas
you're
now
saying
entering an insurgency, we're saying those guys are correlators or compromiters.
the church that is in ruling in the
Collaborators.
hegemony of American politics, since that is no more, we can't have the leaders that ruled during that era.
Yes.
Now you're saying we need insurgent-oriented leaders, which I think is a great point, and I'm complete in agreement with you. Where we would probably disagree, where if we started fleshing out, is what those insurgent leaders should look like, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because and this is going to get to our Christian nationalism subject. What exactly insurgency looks like then?
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
you're going to have an emphasis on prophetic voices, and you mentioned earlier calling to righteousness when you're talking about Trinity School.
Yep.
I'm going to place an emphasis on sacrifices and being killed, suffering,
Yeah, right.
and serving in the Black Plague. Christians served in the Black Plague, and they died, but they were the only ones who didn't run away. They
Right.
offered,
Yeah.
this kind of idea of a cross. So, not that was unfair to say it, because it doesn't imply that you wouldn't want yours to be attached to a cross, your idea. But
Well, so here's the quote I was running with. And this comes from somebody named Philip Derrida, who I don't know who he is, but I follow him because he says interesting things like this. He says, after being on the losing side of a revolution, the conservative ceases to be a conservative in the proper sense of the word, right? He's no longer conserving. He's no longer trying to maintain the social order. He says instead, he either becomes a counter-revolutionary or a collaborator. Mm-hmm. And so what I see on the influence side of things, because I don't even think it's political anymore, because politics is now infiltrated into everything, because everything is being used, everything in society and community, including marriage and the family, is now being used as a weapon of power.
that's right.
Right? And so we can say it's political, but really it's influence. It's saying, how do we influence to change or to regress? So conservatism says we want to maintain our influence, but now that we've lost it, we either have to start collaborating with the new social order, or we have to become the resistance.
Now, don't you think that is so, or that it works because the church, by and large, or in many places, let's just say, agreed with the same materialistic world that said political victory is the highest victory.
If only we can get the laws.
Wealth is the best success.
Well,
right?
Do you see that is what, like, if you tell the story of the church, you would say that was the story? Because I think there's always a faction of the church that's telling those fairy tales, but usually it's television preachers who are trying to get rich. Like, I don't see the church as that.
Those are out in the front lines, but I think the church, by and large, which is why, by and large, I think the church has embraced what I call it is the American dream version.
Yeah.
That we're going to be at the top, we're going to be in the majority, we get to make laws the way we want to be, and if we work hard, we're going to make money and be very comfortable. And I think that is it's true in the sense that that was an outworking of political freedom in our country.
Right.
But I think it was confusion of spheres that was not the sphere of the church. The church, if the church is in a time of peace, it's the most dangerous for the church's time for the church's existence. Because then it starts, it's like this whole idea that in the Proverbs, the guy who said, Lord, don't make me too rich that I forget you.
Right.
Don't make me so poor that I steal.
Yeah.
And this idea, and so in the West, the church has become rich. And I believe we've forgotten God and substituted American civil life for our Christianity. And in the result of that is that when we have, over the last couple of years, it's become clear we're no longer in charge of things in the West, in America.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
I think a lot of Christians have been really angry and upset, and they don't know how to handle that or what to do with it. They have forgotten that Jesus is king, that they're of another kingdom. They can only see their one alliance.
So when I hear that, I think, okay,
we're getting into our nationalism issues.
We are,
yeah.
So my immediate response is we either have to become counter-revolutionaries or collaborators.
What I'm saying is we always should have been counter-revolutionaries.
Right. But it sort of
that.
sounds like when it comes to the influence game, right? Of who's say, I have a friend and he's on a local council, and he said he's gotten to the point now where, and this is a voting situation, he's gotten to the point where now he's not outspoken. He's a rather quiet person.
Yeah.
But when a question comes up, the other council members will all look to him, and he'll just
a certain kind of question, huh?
Yeah, that's right. A certain type of question about the social, like what should we do? It's a moral question.
Yeah.
They all look to him, and he just gives the nod or the no, and then they go along.
Really?
But he's someone that, knowing him, I never would have thought that.
That's
because he is such a quiet individual, right?
Would you say that's the effect of, that's a salt and light effect?
I think
a saltiness.
That's definitely part of that.
Being acknowledged.
He has an admirable persona to him, if that makes sense, right? Like the strong, silent type.
That's right.
Okay, so in that game of gaining influence, when I hear you talk, I wonder, does that say just back out of that game because we're going to get across now, and that's holier?
No, but I don't think I don't think any Christian who is called to function in that way should go do it. But I don't see it as the Christian calling. I don't see it any more than being a mathematician is a Christian calling. Everybody has their callings by God. Those that are called to do it, to live to be a political active person. I don't mean it that way because everybody's supposed to vote. There's a certain level of activism, but
and again, I'm saying I'm trying to take the word political out, and I'm just thinking about influence. So someone who makes a film, right? They have influence. Someone who writes a pop song has influence. Someone who passes a law. Everybody's got a sphere of influence. I think that's true of every believer.
Okay, so this gets to let me take your question because what did I do? So part of my thing on here is how to be political. Let's bring this verse into it.
Okay.
Philippians 1:27, and I'm going to read it in the Greek order, just so it'll sound a little jarring, but it's helpful actually. Only worthy of the gospel of Christ. Now, most versions are translating this "conduct yourselves," but it's the word "political."
Yeah,
it's probably live a political.
Okay, so wait, is it political like polis, like live within the city and in accordance with the manners and the customs of that city?
That's right. Not just the manners and customs, but according to the political rights that are given in that city. So the word is used in ancient history as it's only used 2 times in the New Testament, both in Philippians.
Okay.
And the word is used, its root is polis, or city.
Yeah.
And then right above that, it's from polity, or the rules by which you conduct yourself.
So a polity being a government structure that rules the city.
That's right. And so most of people, Xenophon and the different authors of antiquity, use it to reflect, exercise your rights as a citizen according to whatever sphere. And in Philippi, there was a Roman citizenship. And so there's speculation that what Paul is saying is, as you have these rights, because not everybody had the rights of a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
As you have these rights,
live them out worthy of the gospel.
Worthy of the gospel, so that whether So that whether having come and having seen you or being absent, Paul, I might hear these things concerning you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, that's a spirit mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. So the question I have, or maybe I'll make it as an assertion and then you can push back on it. When I read that, I think to myself, what he's saying is that our political callings, whether it's to vote at a minimum in our system, we get to vote, or to be engaged, you feel called to be engaged at higher levels of activity, whatever that range is, do them in a manner worthy of the gospel. And the gospel dynamics are not the same as government dynamics. Government power is a power of compromise. It's influence, like you said.
And when you say compromise, you're not saying I compromised my morals, but
not
rather
compromise morals.
You want 10, I want 5, let's do 7.
Yes.
That sort of compromise.
That sort of compromise. Those are the dynamics that make government power, political power function.
Right.
Gospel dynamics are the opposite. It inverts power. It is by the cross of Jesus, by dying, that you are victorious. It's by suffering that you realize that you know him and the power of his resurrection. It's these other, it's the relationships to power. It strikes me, and you can push back, but it strikes me that the two spheres use different powers. One uses a sword and the other uses a cross. And he's saying, when you live in the sword power realm, do so in a manner worthy of this realm.
Right.
So if you are a politician and you're on a city board, you do have to compromise. You have to live with the sword, with influence, with compromise. These are the tools of your trade.
Right.
But you need to live as much gospel in them as possible. If you don't work in that, if you're a mathematician or whatever, and your political involvement is at least voting, your whole commitment is you don't have a lot of sword dynamics or government dynamics within your reach. You're to rely on gospel dynamics so that all of us are striving for the faith of the gospel together.
Okay, so let me connect this back to what we were saying before.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit like Lincoln. Like what I hear honored about Lincoln is that he stayed humble, right?
Okay.
He could have fired that general. Instead, he pushes him with a place of humility.
As a politician, in a sense, that's right.
And that's what we honor. That's what he did well. Is that he didn't play the power game, and yet he was wise as a serpent.
Yes, that's right. So he wielded the sword.
Yep.
But the spirit of what he did and many of the steps, he was called foolish. He was called foolish. Seward, the Seward Peninsula, buying Alaska, that Seward.
Okay.
One of his rivals tried to take over, wanted to be president himself, backstabbed him. He rewarded him with another post of honor.
Wow.
And he was very reviled by his peers and his supporters for doing that. He did it not just for the honor. Partly, it also took him out of the way a little bit.
It does, sure.
Right? But it was also to honor him. There was an element of turning the other cheek, and yet he also maintained power, until he was shot.
Yeah. Well, and that's why he was shot. Because if the enemy can't take you out politically, they'll do it another way.
That's right.
All right, so here's how I think about it, because I'm not disagreeing. I think we're really close. The way I think about it is each of us has been given by God a collection of people, right? Jesus said even, I don't pray for the whole world, I just pray for the ones you gave me.
We have our sphere. That's what
and our responsibility, like parents, is to raise our children. And if you fail to do that, you're failing before God. He has given you those children. You know, it's like, who am I supposed to love? Who's the one that the one you married? That's the one you're supposed to love, right?
Yeah.
Now that you're married, you've made that covenant, that's where you are, and God's given you that. So in the same way, we have a sphere of influence, a reach. Our hands reach. Some reach far, some don't.
That's right.
And if you can't reach far, don't feel like you shouldn't.
That's not the point.
It's who you are. It's where you are.
Be faithful to your 1, 5, or 10 talent, whatever you're given, the
there
sphere
it is.
you have.
Exactly. And so to one, that influence, that and service is the way. The cross is the way you gain that influence, right? You don't do it by conniving and scheming.
Well, for a Christian, the cross is the way.
That's right. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Christians, right?
Yeah.
So wisdom, be wise as serpents. Don't foolishly run out ahead or do the front, Jesus even says, use your money to gain influence.
That's right.
The people of the world do it, and they do it because it's smart.
Commendable servant.
Don't be a dope, right? Don't be naive.
And what that servant did really could be called manipulative and even dishonest. And Jesus
on some
commends.
level, right?
Yes,
he
that's
was,
right.
and so this is the parable of the servant who's going to get fired, and he goes and makes deals with the debtors to kind of get favor with them, knowing that his job's about to expire over here.
Right. And his master made money, but if it turned out that he was terminated, he had some places potentially to land.
Right.
And Jesus commends him for that behavior, which is a very intriguing.
Yeah. So I take those things, right, that we have to work within this system, this is what you're saying, but we do it in a way that honors the gospel.
Yeah.
Then I also take that idea that Paul's talking about tearing down strongholds.
Yes.
And that we're engaged in this spiritual war to, like what I was saying about the Trinity School, building communities that honor Christ. And anything built in this community that's built to dishonor Christ, to glorify evil, we do tear those down. The way Paul was describing doing that was by tearing down arguments, tearing down thoughts, taking them captive and saying, no, we throw this out. This is not true. Mm-hmm. And so there's some, like Paul, and I think this is the call of an apostle, to be honest. And you could say lowercase a apostle. That's fine.
Sure.
The call is to go into the public sphere and to take that influence to a level that's so intense that violence will often break out if you're doing it right. But at the same time, miracles will break out.
When you say that, you don't mean that you're intending violence. So that doesn't mean you're not doing it right if no violence comes.
No, I mean that evil, when it at its last resort, will turn to violence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In the face of real spiritual power and goodness.
Yeah.
And so some of us are called to that, right? Some people are called to public proclamation of the gospel. Some people are called to just do what's right in a corrupt system. And that alone will turn the things upside down, right? Like we were talking about our governor. If tomorrow our governor said, I've had a crisis of conscience and now I'm only going to do what the Bible describes as good and right, that would turn Oregon upside down. They wouldn't know what to do. It would be vetoing everything.
Yeah. So at one point, so let me ask something you said, because I'm in agreement with the way you just expressed it.
Yeah.
But you have used other expressions at different times that have made me think, I don't get that one.
Yeah.
For example, things like, I think you said, the way the left protests, Christians should go to school boards and raise their voices and shout out their ideas.
Yeah, tear down strongholds at school boards.
And see, I don't like that because I think that is I don't see any gospel in that. You know what I'm saying? I don't think when Paul went, when he was kicked out, he left, he came back, they had to beat him to leave.
Yeah.
He went somewhere else and he kept talking.
Right.
So I don't see him ever shouting down people or
I'm not saying.
In fact, even the Isaiah passage where it says when the Messiah will come, he will not raise his voice in the street. It says he won't crush the bruised reed or snuff out the smoking flax.
Right.
He will not raise his voice in the street. And I think the idea is there.
He's not starting an uprising.
He's militant. He's not an uprising. Yeah. He's not that vocal, loudest thing. He's not. You can't compare him to Rome. You can't compare him with the crazy prophets.
Wait, who are the crazy prophets?
There were people that there were several false Christs in the first century, and they roused up followings. And they were animated. Come to me. They whip up a crowd.
Yeah.
And
we're going to take on Rome.
That's right.
Which is what Jesus' followers thought he was going to do.
That's right. And the Hasmoneans had done that 200 years before, and had a measure of success until they didn't, until they were killed.
Right.
But that's what the Jewish people at the time were wanting, this resurrection of this Hasmonean family to come up and really stick it to those guys. You know?
So what you're seeing is a Christianity, the danger of a Christianity to be animated by that same spirit that says we're going to overthrow the social order by our force of will.
I think the closer you get to sword dynamics and the further from cross, it's not that sword are never right, but the more you move in that direction, I think it doesn't reflect gospel dynamics anymore. It starts being an emphasis that's too much. So I would not say it's wrong. So for example, do you remember when they were the abortion marches, not right, where they would walk, they would get on their knees on sidewalks, copying the Birmingham, Alabama peace walks, right?
Okay.
And they were arrested. This is, what's his name, Terry, in the 80s.
No, I don't know.
Randall Terry.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't think any of that was wrong because they weren't trying to they were in a sense reflecting meekness with a passive resistance.
Right.
And that was part of Martin Luther King's argument, that passive resistance in the face of such things There were Christian ministers who said, "You're going too far, Mr. Mr. King, whatever," and
Reverend Doctor.
Reverend Doctor, exactly. And so I don't know. I'm sure you guys in your class reads the Birmingham
Letter from the Birmingham jail.
Yeah, it's an exceptional letter.
Yeah.
And his point is to say, which is why he did passive resistance. He says we have to do some resistance.
Right.
It is not Christian to lie down and do nothing and slaughter only.
That's right. Yeah.
But we will not take up and rise against. Right, which is what I think some of it now. We mentioned earlier the other guy at the time of him who was saying black only nation. What was
Malcolm X.
Malcolm X. Yeah.
Yeah.
They clashed.
Yeah.
And it's the clash of Christianity and Islam.
For sure. Yeah.
Islam is of the sword.
That's
You
driving.
shall bow down, and I think that the gospel comes and invites you to bow down. And then does say it in this way: if you won't stumble over this small rock, there's a big rock going to come and crush you to powder.
That's right. Yeah.
Save
This is a talk. We've talked
stumble.
about this before. This is a talk I give when I go to Sierra Leone, which is 80% Muslim country.
Yeah.
But only since the 80s has it gotten so much Muslim influence. So it was almost all Christian.
It's interesting.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
But one of the talks I give to the teachers is the difference between Israel and Islam, and I get this from Dennis Prager, that the word Islam means to submit, and the word Israel means to wrestle with God. And the question I ask them as teachers is, in your classroom, is this a classroom of Islam? Because they're all Christians who I'm talking to.
Submit.
Right? Are you walking out of the stick, which is customary teacher behavior in there?
Right. That's right.
And stay in line,
I think that's a great analogy.
Or are you teaching them to wrestle with the truth, wrestle with God? Because God is the logos, right?
You wrestle with
so
them.
we wrestle with it, and He invites us to do that, and He honors those who do.
I completely agree with that.
He named His nation Israel.
That's right. The other verse in Philippians, I'll just read it and we'll wrap up our topic here. Of us, the citizenship or the polis, our political life, it's a noun instead of a verb, in the heaven exists.
Yeah.
So I think, and this is where I probably get some of my thoughts of wanting to say we have two spheres. And you've never come back with saying I don't agree with that.
No, I do. Yeah.
I'm just what I see in the emphasis is that this sphere is primary, or this sphere, I've got hands up. The heavenly sphere of citizenship is primary over the earthly ones, but we're not angels. We don't live in that one only. We live in this one. Yeah. And we're called to act in such a way that we can pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
It's like if you were
heaven.
wearing a Ducks jersey at a Beaver game. Yeah, I'm noticing your shirt there. But the sense that you're wearing a shirt that says citizen of heaven as you walk on the earth.
Yes, that's right.
And so now people are going to look to you.
Yeah.
And if you start covering that shirt up so you can get all, good luck.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And I also, so here's what keeps coming to mind as you're describing the concern you have. Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
what I've taken that to mean is there's a puffing up, right? So leaven puffs up the bread.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a puffing up that happens in the Pharisees.
And it spreads
with the religious custom, right? And once it gets into a church, it grows out of control. Everybody thinks there's someone important. And then Herod and his political power, and so the church has these two, this religious puffing up, this political puffing up, and you need to be aware of it all the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people look at the political side and say, we don't want to do that. And meanwhile, the leaven of the Pharisees is inflating them without even realizing.
I totally agree with you. And would you say that the leaven of Herod could also be, given Herod's unique, he is a Jew.
You're right.
He is in the covenant there. And what he has done is agreed for political power to serve Rome.
He's compromised.
He's compromised because, why? Why did he think to himself, this is a worthwhile enterprise? And I have to think it's because he thinks to himself, the God thing isn't winning. It's not getting us anywhere. We're not gaining ground. I'm not gaining ground. This other pathway, because we know he didn't
is that a motive or is that a rationale after the fact?
I know
that he's going to gain power.
I don't know,
because he was well known for his debauched occult practices.
I know,
cutting off John the Baptist's head.
But wait a minute, he never let go of the Jewish part of him as well, because John says to him, "You shall not have your brother," and he's cut to the quick by it. Now he kills John,
Yeah.
right? But it got to him. He
Right.
heard it. When
Or
he hears about
did he
this
hear
king,
it, or did he realize that this is going to get around and this guy's going to take me out? And so for political reasons, he puts him in jail. But he's afraid of God, so he still doesn't have him killed.
Okay, that's all
Do you know
I
what I'm
really
saying?
want to get to.
That's the same intrigue. It's those
There's
laws of
something
power.
there
He's
that-
playing a game.
That's right.
For
and
sure.
so he concludes, which is much like the Machiavellian today's,
Right.
that politics is really the only thing that works. And he's lost sight of faith.
It's an unholy pragmatism.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. I
Right.
agree with that completely.
So I would agree, but I would still take it further, and I think the best example is Jonah. Jonah is not called to go and preach repentance to Jews, but he's there to declare to Nineveh, a bunch of pagans, that God's bringing his judgment on them for their immoral acts. And so I think there is a certain kind of a standard that God holds the Jewish nation to, especially through the Old Testament. But then there's a universal standard, right?
True.
That Babylon will be judged, that Nineveh is judged, that Gog and Magog, that, Jesus says, woe to you, Tyre and Sidon. These regions have an expectation of righteousness that's not the same.
He lets them go their own way, but he never lets them off the hook.
It never does. And so I would put America in that category.
Well, all of the nation, I mean, I don't know where you are in the new covenant in Israel as a nation, but to me, I don't see
Modern day Israel.
Modern day Israel, if there is any covenantal relation to Abraham, I won't get into that for the moment, but what we will just say this, they are secular. It's not a religious Israel.
That's interesting.
As a nation, they're not religious.
Right.
They are secular. There are religious groups in Israel,
Correct.
but it's government established in 1948.
Well, it's very
49, whatever.
factional, and so the religious groups, might create a coalition to gain a majority in parliament and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of what I keep thinking of, in fact, I was in exchange with a woman on Twitter where she was saying, like, I'm just tired of voting. And the thing that keeps coming to my head is what we said a few weeks ago was, God will judge. America has no king but its people. And we keep thinking that these politicians are our rulers or our leaders. They're not even leaders, they're servants. And they should be fearful of the will of the people, the king, America's true king.
Yeah.
And if the people say, we are the king and our king is Jesus, right? He's the king of the kings, then America will go right.
Or even if it's, okay, are you okay with this? You might not be. When I hear you say that, I completely agree.
Yeah.
But I also say, even if they don't say Jesus, but God is bigger than you, right? They're a God-fearer, but not a Christian, let's call them.
Oh, this is the theistic.
This is theistic.
Yeah.
If they acknowledge that, hey, God is above all, you guys are not the ultimate powers in all this big picture here. So you got the Christians who say Jesus is king. But I think our nation in the past has had a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily bow the knee to Jesus, but they would have said, the man upstairs is the one really we have to give an account
Here's
to.
what I would say.
Okay,
One,
you don't like that.
I don't like it. Here's why. I want to give honor to Christ.
I'm agreeing with that.
And I feel like
person.
So if I were to say Jesus is your king and you'll stand before him one day, and they were to turn it into God and do what I know and the Bible teaches to be right without ever naming Christ, then I think we'll have won a victory, if not saving their soul.
I agree that it's
but I'm not going
to
I'm not going to give them an easier road. Does that make sense?
I do.
Because
this
in
is where
doing
we differ,
so,
though.
I fear that we would I'm
You don't
trying to
wanna
say what they want to
negotiate
hear
with yourself.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And also, I'm telling them a little bit of what they want to hear, afraid of their rejection of Christ, rather than doing what God demands.
Well, what would you
and
do
fearing
in a
him.
practical sense? Maybe not practical. What would you do if you were made president? The people that would say Jesus is king, it's a minority,
Right.
but you have to rule a majority of the people.
I mean,
You have to appeal to the
could you get
majority.
elected president saying Jesus is king?
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's pretend you're elected president.
Yeah.
You have to have on your side the God-fearers who don't want to say Jesus necessarily. They'll acknowledge God.
Right.
And would you view them as your allies to move our nation in a good direction?
I would, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I think of like Ben Shapiro, right?
That's a good example.
Yeah, who's
Dennis
a
Prager,
well-known
you mentioned
Jewish,
earlier.
commentator.
But it's I remember as a kid going to guys my dad logged with as a logger
Mm-hmm.
and went to a funeral and talking about the man upstairs. Never heard that phrase before. You know,
Yeah.
I'm 10 years old or whatever.
Yep.
And I realized then, or in reflection afterwards as well, they were not God-fearing people. They were cussing, bar-hopping, adulterating individuals. But they also thought that God was real, and someday they thought by being good people they get a pass with God. Their works,
Some version of good.
Yes.
Me and God have a deal.
That's that's exactly right.
I worked something out with him.
There's a guy, a friend of mine, and that I do some stuff with, and that's what he says. God and I have an understanding.
Right.
And
it's just not the God you think it is.
yeah, I mean, I think this person is in error, but we're allies in the fundamental moral direction of a nation as citizens, because the God piece and being abandoned, it has led to gross immorality.
Right. So here's what I would say, right? And I think, okay, how would you... There's a bunch of Christians in Michigan who have teamed up with a bunch of Muslims to get the whole transgender ideology kicked out of the schools, right? That's a perfect example.
It is a good example.
I'm going to say, I would say, right, if I was president of that school board up there or where, whatever, this is not right. Jesus is king and he won't allow it. And if you don't believe Jesus is king, you still understand it's not right. So let's get together. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Because participation in the political process as citizens is not the same as being a member of the church.
No, I agree.
Right?
It's
and
not
so
the same.
You, Muslim, you could come to my church, but you're not going to be a member till you honor Christ.
That's right.
Right? But let's vote together tomorrow.
That's why I feel drawn towards
together.
the theistic way of expressing it, because citizenship in the nation isn't the same as, you don't have to be a Christian to be good standing.
You don't have to be a Jew to live in Israel in the old covenant, but you don't get to build a temple.
Or be a part of the priestly stuff. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you don't have to go to temple. You don't have to honor God, Yahweh. You can be a foreign person worshiping a foreign god, and that's fine. But if you go around saying to your neighbor,
I don't think in Israel you couldn't.
Because the sin would be that you go to your neighbor and say, "Come with me and worship the false god," and that's what the punishable offense is.
Yeah,
they're not going door to door to see what you worship. They're saying when you make it public.
Yeah,
that was the sin of the Old Testament. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
That's deep in.
You've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the episode and found something to reconsider, share it with a friend, start a conversation, and remember to dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.
All right.